The square of the alien settlement was crowded. Everyone had gathered to watch. The air was heavy with dust and the suns were burning high. In the center, a young alien girl stood with her hands tied. Her head hung low, her thin body trembling. She was no more than 16 cycles old, yet her people had already decided her fate. The elders of her tribe raised their voices. "She is sterile," one of them declared, his voice sharp like a blade. "She cannot bring new life into this world, and so she has no value." The crowd jeered. Some threw stones, some spat at her feet. The girl flinched but did not cry. Her large eyes glistened, but she forced herself to remain silent. Her name was Ilara. She had always been small compared to the others of her kind. While other girls were praised for their health, their strong bodies, their promise of children, she had always been treated as a shadow. She had prayed it would change one day. But now the truth was out and her society demanded punishment. The sentence was cruel. She would be branded and cast out, to be left in the desert alone. Her people believed death was the only fitting end for one who could not give birth. The elder lifted a long iron rod, its tip glowing red from the fire. The crowd cheered as he approached. Ilara's knees shook, but she refused to beg. She thought, if she begged, they would laugh even harder. In the corner of the crowd, one figure did not join the chants. A human man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes. His clothes were dusty from travel, and his face carried scars of hard years. His name was Daniel, a trader who had come to the settlement only to buy supplies. He had not expected to find himself in the middle of a public judgment. Yet as he watched the girl stand there, weak and trembling, something inside him stirred. Daniel had seen cruelty before. He had seen slaves beaten, orphans starve, and men killed for less, but this was worse. They were punishing a child for something beyond her control. He felt his fists clench. He told himself to look away, to stay silent. This was not his fight, and humans were already seen as outsiders here. But his heart would not let him turn. The iron was pressed against Ilara's skin. A sharp hiss filled the air as smoke rose. She gasped in pain but did not scream. The crowd roared with laughter. The mark of shame was now burned into her shoulder. She collapsed to the ground, her body curling as if to protect itself. The elders declared, "She is nothing now. She will walk the desert and never return." 2 guards dragged her outside the settlement walls. They cut her bonds and pushed her to the sand. The gates closed behind her with a loud clang. She was alone. Her legs barely held her as she stumbled forward. Each step sent waves of pain through her branded shoulder. The desert stretched endlessly, hot winds stinging her eyes. She knew she would not last long, but still, she walked. From the shadows of a nearby cliff, Daniel followed. He had slipped away from the crowd as the sentence ended. Something about the girl would not leave his mind. Her courage, her silence, her refusal to break even when branded. He thought of his own daughter, gone years ago from sickness. The same small hands, the same helpless frame, and his heart ached. Ilara stumbled again, falling face first into the sand. Her lips were cracked, her eyes unfocused. She whispered to herself, though no one was there to listen, "Why was I born if this is all I am worth?" Her words broke Daniel's resolve. He stepped out from behind the rock, his boots crunching against the sand. The girl barely lifted. Her head seeing the shadow of a human figure, fear flickered in her gaze. Was this another enemy, another one to mock her? But Daniel's voice was low, steady. "Hold on, child," he said. "You are not alone anymore." For the first time in her life, Ilara felt someone speak to her not with hate, but with warmth. Her eyes closed and darkness claimed her. Daniel knelt beside her, lifting her into his arms. The sun burned above. Them the desert stretched forever, but he had already decided he would not let her die, not like this. The story of their bond had just begun. The desert stretched wide, endless sand and heat pressing down. Daniel carried the alien girl in his arms, her body limp, her breathing faint. He had traveled many worlds, faced danger and cruelty, but in that moment, she felt lighter than a feather and heavier than his own heart. Every step sank into the burning sand. But he did not stop. He muttered under his breath, as if talking to the ghost of his past. "You're safe now. I won't let them take you too." The girl's skin was hot with fever. Her wound from the brand was red and raw. Daniel knew she wouldn't last long without water and shade. He scanned the horizon, searching, until he spotted an outcrop of rocks. Dragging himself there, he laid her down in the small shadow it offered. Her chest rose and fell shallow, her lips moving but no words coming out. He pulled out his canteen and lifted her head gently. "Drink," he whispered, tipping, drops of water against her mouth. At first she resisted, trembling, but instinct was stronger than fear. Her lips parted and she drank. Daniel watched her eyes flicker open for a moment, wide, filled with confusion and fear. She tried to pull away, weak hands pushing against him. Her voice cracked like broken glass. Why help me? I am nothing." Cursed. Her words cut deeper than any knife. He shook his head, firm but gentle. "You're not nothing," he said. "No one deserves to be left like this." Her gaze searched his face as if trying to see if he was lying. But her strength faded and her eyes closed again. Daniel wrapped her in his cloak to shield her from the burning air. The desert was dangerous, filled with scavenger beasts and raiders. Night would bring freezing winds. He couldn't risk waiting too long. He tightened his grip around her and began walking again. Every step was a battle, but something inside him pushed him forward. It wasn't just pity. It was something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Hours passed before he reached the edge of his small camp. A patched-up transport sat there, old but reliable. He laid the girl inside on a thin mattress. His hands worked quickly, cleaning the burn on her shoulder. She stirred in pain, whispering. Words in her own language Daniel didn't understand, but he knew it was fear. So he spoke softly, filling the silence with calm. "You're safe. I promise. Nobody will hurt you again." When he finished tending her wound, he sat back, exhausted. Memories of his daughter's last days came uninvited. The sickness had taken her quickly. He had held her in his arms the same way, helpless and broken. Now, with this alien child, something in him felt like a second chance, not to replace what he lost, but to do what he couldn't before: protect, save, hold on. As night fell, the desert turned cold, the wind howling outside the camp walls. Daniel lit a small fire, its glow filling the small space. He checked on the girl again, brushing strands of silver hair from her face. Her skin was no longer burning, her breathing steadier. Still, he knew tomorrow would be hard. The settlement would not forget. The aliens would not forgive him for interfering. Already he could feel the weight of their hatred pressing down. But when he looked at her face, fragile and bruised, he knew he had made the right choice. Suddenly she stirred. Again, her voice soft but clear enough to reach him. "Why didn't you leave me?" she asked, her eyes half open, glowing faintly in the firelight. Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't answer right away, afraid his voice would break. Finally, he said, "Because no one deserves to die unloved." Her lips trembled, and, for the first time, a tear slid down her cheek. She turned her face away, ashamed of showing weakness, but Daniel only adjusted the blanket around her and said nothing more. The night dragged on. Outside, distant howls of creatures echoed. Inside, the fragile sound of her breathing was all that mattered. Daniel sat awake, his hand resting near his old rifle, his eyes never leaving her. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if saving her would lead to war with her people. But he did know one thing. He could not abandon her. And with that thought, the firelight flickered across his face. A man scarred by loss, now holding the beginning of something new. Morning came slowly. The desert suns rose high, casting long shadows over the small camp. Inside the patched transport, Ilara opened her eyes. For a moment she did not know where she was. Her last memory was the burning pain, the crowd, the desert, swallowing her. Now she lay wrapped in a blanket, her wound bandaged, the scent of smoke and cooked food filling the air. She sat up quickly, panic rising in her chest. Her eyes darted around until they landed on him. The human, Daniel, he was, crouched by a small pot over the fire, stirring quietly. His back was broad, his movements calm, nothing threatening. But still, she pressed herself against the wall, pulling the blanket close as if it could shield her. Daniel noticed, and turned slowly. He didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're awake," he said softly. "Good. That means you're stronger than they thought." She said nothing, her lips pressed tight, her eyes sharp like a cornered animal. He ladled soup into a small bowl and set it near her. The smell was rich, human food she didn't recognize. Her stomach growled, but she turned her face away. Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes were heavy with sadness. "You don't have to trust me yet," he said, "but you need to eat. You'll heal faster." Hours passed in silence. Ilara sat curled up, staring at him whenever he moved. Daniel went about his tasks, checking supplies, fixing small parts of the transport, keeping the fire alive. He didn't push her, didn't demand answers. He simply gave her space, as if waiting for something only time could bring. Finally, hunger won. Her trembling hands reached for the bowl, lifting it slowly. She sniffed the soup first, suspicious, before tasting a drop. It was warm, salty, different from the food of her people. But as it slid down her throat, her body relaxed just a little. Daniel pretended not to notice, though relief softened his shoulders. That night, as the wind howled outside, Ilara shifted under the blanket. Sleep wouldn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of her people, spitting, laughing, branding her. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Then a small sound startled her. She turned and saw a child's drawing taped to the wall, faded and old. A little human girl holding hands with a taller figure. Her father. Her heart ached. Though she didn't know why, Daniel saw her looking, and walked over slowly. His eyes lingered on the drawing, his voice low. "My daughter drew that. Before she passed." The words were simple, but they carried a heavy weight. Ilara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask, but no words came. Daniel only gave her a small smile and stepped back. "You don't need to be afraid here," he said. "This place may not be much, but it's safe." For the first time, Ilara felt something strange. Not trust, not yet, but a crack in the wall around her heart. She whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. "Why? Why did you save me? Your people hate mine." Daniel looked at her for a long time, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, "Because no one deserves to be left behind. Not my daughter. Not you." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty anymore. There was something there, thin, fragile, like the first thread of a bond. Ilara pulled the blanket around herself and lowered her head. She still feared, this human, still feared what he might want from her. But in her chest, a tiny ember of warmth flickered, something she had never known from her own people: kindness. As night deepened, Daniel sat by the fire, watching over her. Her breathing grew steady, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. He whispered to himself, not sure if she could hear. "You'll be safe here. Even if the whole world turns against us." Outside, the desert wind screamed, but inside the small transport, a fragile peace settled. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. But in that moment, something had begun. A bond too fragile to name, yet strong enough to change both their lives. Days passed. The girl's wound healed slowly under Daniel's care. She spoke little, but each day she grew a little stronger. Sometimes she helped him clean the tools. Sometimes she fed the small fire that kept the camp warm. Her eyes no longer held the same panic. Though shadows of fear still lingered, Daniel noticed. But he did not push her. He knew trust could not be demanded, only earned. But outside their small world, whispers spread. The settlement had not forgotten the girl who was condemned, nor the human who dared to interfere. At first it was only murmurs. The human shelters the sterile one. He defies the law of our people. But soon, anger replaced whispers. A group of enforcers gathered in the taverns, muttering about punishment. They would not allow one man to break their order. One evening, as the suns dipped low and painted the desert red, Daniel sat sharpening his knife. Ilara was sitting quietly nearby, tracing patterns in the sand. The sound of boots outside made her freeze. Daniel heard it too, and his hand moved. Instinctively to his rifle, the door of the transport rattled before 3 alien figures stepped in. Their eyes cold, their armor reflected the firelight, their voices sharp with command. "Human," one spat. "You harbor the cursed one, give her to us." Daniel stood slowly, placing himself between them and the girl. His voice was calm, but carried steel. "She's not yours to take," the leader sneered, showing his teeth. "She is unclean. She brings ruin. Your kind is already unwanted here. Do not add more reasons for hate." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening. "She stays," he said, "and you'll leave." Ilara trembled, her hands clutching. The blanket tight, she wanted to cry out, to beg him not to fight for her. If they killed him, it would be her fault. Her people's hate was now his burden. The enforcers stepped closer, their weapons glowing faintly, but Daniel did not move aside, his broad frame blocking their view of the girl. The standoff stretched, the fire crackling in the silence. Then the leader hissed, "You think your kindness changes her fate? She is nothing." Daniel's voice rose, steady and unshaken. "No one is nothing." For a moment, even the enforcers faltered. Something in his voice carried weight, but pride burned hotter, and they turned with snarls. "This is not over. Human," one growled. As they left, their shadows stretched long across the sand, promising return. When the door closed, Ilara's chest shook. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Why do you fight them? You could die," she whispered. Daniel knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I've already lost one daughter," he said softly. "I will not lose another." His words struck her heart like a storm. She stared at him, confused, trembling. Daughter. He had called her daughter. No one had ever claimed her before, not even her own blood. That night, Ilara lay awake. Her mind was a storm of questions and fear. Was he truly different? Or was this another cruel trick? But then she remembered the way he stood firm, the way his voice cut through hate. A warmth spread through her chest, frightening but new. She whispered into the dark, "Maybe I belong here." The words felt strange, fragile, but they were real. Outside, however, the settlement grew restless. The enforcers gathered more allies, whispers became threats, and in the deep shadows of the desert, a plan began to form. They would not let the human and the cursed girl live in peace. Soon, the test of their fragile bond would come, a test of fire and blood. The days after the enforcer's visit were heavy with silence. Daniel worked with quiet focus, keeping watch on the horizon. He knew the settlement would not forget. He could almost feel their eyes in the desert wind. But inside the camp, life took on a rhythm. Ilara grew stronger, her steps steadier, her fear less sharp. At first she only sat in the corner, but soon she began to help. She fetched water from the tank. She cleaned tools with her small hands. She even cooked simple meals after watching Daniel carefully. Her food was clumsy, sometimes too salty, sometimes too burned, but Daniel always ate with a nod, never complaining. Each small act chipped away at the wall around her heart. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Daniel's daughter's drawing caught Ilara's eyes again. She walked toward it, fingers brushing the faded paper. Daniel saw and spoke softly. "She used to draw everything. The stars, the camp, even me." His voice carried both love and grief. Ilara lowered her eyes, whispering, "I can't give children. I can't give family." Her words were heavy with shame, but Daniel only shook his head. "Family is not only blood," he said. "It's who we choose to protect." Those words stayed with her through the night. For the first time, she began to wonder if she could still be worth something. The chance came sooner than she thought. 2 days later, the camp was attacked. It started with a low growl outside, then the sound of claws scratching against metal. Daniel grabbed his rifle and motioned Ilara to stay hidden. But when the door burst open, a desert raider beast leapt inside. Its body was lean, covered in scales, its eyes glowing with hunger. Daniel fired, the shot tearing into its side, but another beast followed, snarling. Ilara froze, fear rooting her to the spot. The child inside her screamed to hide, to run, but then she saw Daniel was pinned under the second beast, its teeth snapping close to his throat. His rifle knocked from his hand. Her body moved before her mind. She grabbed the iron rod lying by the fire. Her hands shook, her breath caught, but she ran forward. With all her strength, she swung, striking the beast's head. It roared, turning. On her, its claws slashing the air. Pain tore across her arm, but she didn't stop. She stabbed again, shouting, her voice breaking through years of silence. "Leave him alone!" The creature lunged, but Daniel rolled free. Grabbing his rifle, he fired point blank. The beast collapsed, the air filled with smoke and blood. The camp fell silent again, except for their ragged breathing. Ilara staggered back, her arm bleeding. The iron rod slipping from her fingers, Daniel caught her before she fell. His eyes wide, filled not with anger but with pride. "You saved me," he whispered. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No, I only made things worse. I'm weak." Daniel pressed his hand against her wound, steady and firm. "You're not weak," he said. "You're brave. Braver than anyone who left you to die." For the first time, Ilara believed his words. Her chest ached, but it was not from pain. It was from the strange warmth spreading inside her. She had fought back, she had protected someone, and in his eyes she was not cursed, not useless. She was worth something. But outside, the desert was not silent for long. The gunfire had echoed, carrying across the dunes. In the distance, shadows moved. Settlers, enforcers, drawn by the sound. They would come soon, and this time, they would not leave without blood. Ilara sat by the fire later that night, her arm bandaged, her gaze locked on the flames. She whispered to herself, "I am not nothing. I am not nothing." Daniel heard her, though he said nothing. He only smiled faintly, watching her with the quiet pride of a father. But in the back of his mind, he knew. Her proof of worth had only just begun. And the real test was still waiting in the shadows. The night after the beast attack was heavy with unease. The fire burned low, shadows flickering on the walls of the old transport. Daniel cleaned his rifle in silence while Ilara sat near the flames, her bandaged arm resting in her lap. She still felt the echo of the beast's weight, its snarls in her ears, but stronger than fear was something new. She had fought, she had saved him, and yet she knew the danger was far from over. At dawn, the sound of footsteps shook the desert sand. Not one, not two, but many. Daniel's eyes hardened as he stepped outside. The settlement enforcers had returned, and this time, they did not come quietly. Dozens of them stood in a line, their armor shining under the twin suns. Behind them, villagers watched with narrowed eyes. The leader of the enforcers raised his voice, sharp and cold. "Human, you defy our law. You protect the sterile one. You dishonor us. She must be taken." Daniel stood tall, his rifle in hand though lowered. His voice was calm but carried thunder beneath it. "She is not a curse. She is not yours to punish. She is under my protection." The leader's lip curled. "Then you will face trial, human, and she will face exile again, this time without hope." Daniel's jaw tightened. But before he could reply, Ilara stepped forward, her small figure trembling, but her eyes steady. "No," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "I will not be dragged like an animal again." Gasps rose from the villagers. For the first time, the condemned girl spoke back to those who had cast her out. The enforcer laughed cruelly. "You think your words matter, cursed one? You will prove nothing." Hilara's heart pounded, but Daniel's presence beside her gave her strength. Her voice grew louder. "Then let me prove it. Test me. Not as a mother, not as what you think I should be, but as myself." A murmur spread through the crowd. The elders whispered among themselves, their eyes gleaming with cruel interest. Finally, one elder raised his staff. "Very well," he declared. "The sterile one will face the trial of fire. If she survives, she may stay. But if she fails, both she and the human will die." Daniel turned sharply, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is madness," he growled, but Hilara touched his arm gently, her gaze steady. "I have to do this. If I run, they will never stop hunting us." Daniel's chest tightened, but he saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire his daughter once had when she faced fear. He nodded slowly, though his voice shook. "Then I will stand with you." The trial of fire was brutal. At the edge of the settlement, they led her to a pit of burning coals. Above it hung swinging platforms, ropes and spears, designed to break body and spirit. The crowd gathered, shouting, waiting for her failure. Daniel stood at the edge, his fists clenched, his rifle taken from him by the guards. He could only watch, helpless but ready to act if they tried to kill her unfairly. Hilara stepped into the trial ground, her bare feet inches from the heat. Her body shook, but she whispered to herself, "I am not nothing. I am not nothing." At the signal, she leapt onto the first platform, the wood creaking. The flames below roared, smoke rising into her face. The next rope swung wildly, almost out of reach. She stretched, her injured arm screaming in pain. But she grabbed hold. Gasps rose from the crowd as she pulled herself across. One enforcer released a hunting beast into the pit. It snarled, lunging at her. Hilara froze for a heartbeat, fear clutching her chest. Then she remembered Daniel's words. "No one is nothing." With a scream, she swung on the rope, kicking the beast aside. It fell into the fire below, flames swallowing its body. The crowd erupted, some with cheers, some with curses. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched her climb higher, her body small and weak but her spirit blazing. Every step she took was a strike against the chains they had bound her with. When she finally leapt to the last platform and landed safely on solid ground, a hush fell over the crowd. She stood tall, her chest heaving, sweat and ash covering her. But her eyes glowed with defiance. The elders' staff trembled. The law had spoken. She had survived. Hilara raised her head and shouted, "I am not cursed. I am alive. I am worthy." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Daniel felt pride swell in his chest. For the first time, the girl who had been branded as worthless stood before her people as more than they ever believed, but deep. In the shadows, the leader of the enforcers scowled. The trial had not ended her. Now their hatred burned hotter, and Daniel knew this was not victory yet. It was only the beginning of a larger storm. The crowd was silent. Ash drifted from the trial pit, the flames slowly dying. Hilara stood tall, her body trembling but unbroken. She had faced the trial of fire and lived. Her skin was blistered, her arm still bandaged, but her spirit shone. Brighter than ever, Daniel's chest swelled with pride. He had seen soldiers break under less, but this girl, cast out, branded, humiliated, had risen higher than any of them. He wanted to run to her, to shield her from every stare. But he stayed still, knowing this was her moment. The elders shifted uneasily. They had expected her to fail. They had expected her to burn. Now the law of their own people stood against them. She had passed. One elder raised his staff with a trembling hand. "By tradition, she may remain," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But the leader of the enforcers sneered. "No. This is a trick, a curse. She defies the natural order." He stepped forward, his blade drawn. "If the law cannot end her, then I will." Before anyone could stop him, he charged. The crowd gasped. Some cried out, but none moved to protect. Heard Daniel's roar cut through the air as he pushed past the guards. He caught the enforcer mid-strike, their bodies colliding with force. The blade slashed Daniel's side, blood blooming across his shirt. But he didn't stop. With a surge, of strength. He slammed the man into the ground, his fists striking until the enforcer lay still. The villagers stared, stunned. Daniel stood bleeding, his chest heaving, his voice fierce. "Enough. You speak of laws and curses, but all I see is fear." He pointed to Ilara, who stood trembling but unbroken. "She has more courage than any of you. She deserves life. She deserves respect, more than your hatred will ever give." The little crowd stirred, murmurs spreading. Some lowered their eyes ashamed. Others looked at Ilara with something new, doubt, even respect. And then, a small voice broke through the noise. A human child, Daniel's own daughter's friend from the settlement, stepped forward. Her tiny hand reached for Ilara's. "She's not cursed," the child said, her voice innocent but powerful. "She's like us. She's family." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her people had spat at her, branded her, cast her into the desert. But here, from the smallest voice, came words she had longed for her whole life. Her knees almost gave way, tears filling her eyes. Family. She had been called family. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm despite his wound. "She is mine now," he declared, his voice echoing like thunder. "I take her as my own daughter, and no one will take her from me." The settlement was divided that day. Some turned away, unwilling to change, but others whispered that maybe the human was right. Maybe worth was not only in blood or children, maybe worth was in heart, in courage, in loyalty. Daniel did not wait for their full approval. He took Ilara's hand and led her away. Every step away from the settlement felt like chains breaking. The desert stretched before them, endless but full of promise. She looked back once at the place that had cast her out. Then she looked forward. To the man beside her, the journey was not easy. Daniel's wound slowed him, and Ilara insisted. On helping, she carried supplies, fetched water, learned quickly from him for the first time. She wasn't a burden. She was needed. And every time Daniel looked at her, his eyes held pride. Not pity, not shame, but pride. Weeks later, they reached a small outpost where Daniel had friends. There, no one knew her past, no one cared about the brand on her shoulder. She was simply Ilara, a quiet girl with silver eyes who worked hard and stayed close to her human father. For the first time, she laughed, a sound small and shy. It startled Daniel, who hadn't heard laughter in his home for many years. The sound filled the room like sunlight, and for the first time, he felt whole again. At night, when she curled up near the fire, Ilara whispered to herself, "I am not nothing. I am home." Her eyes closed, peace softening her face. Daniel watched her with tired eyes but a full heart. The wound on his body still ached, but the wound inside his soul was healing. He had saved her life, but in truth, she had saved his, and so in a world of cruelty and fire, a bond was forged, not of blood, not of law, but of choice. The sterile girl once condemned, and the human father once broken. Together, they found something greater than survival. They found family. They found home.